Welcome back to Way of the Wrench and another episode of How to Become a Welder. On this very special episode, I'm going to show you how to make one of these, your very own metal welded horseshoe puzzle. And in typical Way of the Wrench fashion, I'm also going to be showing you how to make your very own jigs and fixtures so that you can make the bends in this nice and accurate and lots of repeatability, plus lots of other trade secrets. So stay tuned, you're not going to want to miss it. Now this horseshoe puzzle has been around forever, and traditionally this shape here has been a steel horseshoe that's welded together with some chains and make the project. Now there isn't a ton of welding in this project. The bulk of this video is going to be showing you how to make your very own jigs and from scratch, the whole design process, etc. So not only will you be able to make a jig to do the horseshoe puzzle, you should be able to figure out some other bending jigs for things that you want to make in the future. All right, so what is a jig? Well, a jig is simply a fixture that allows you to make stuff that is really accurate, it's really repeatable, and usually it's a mass production thing. So it takes some time and effort to make the one jig, but once you've done that, you can make the parts really quite quickly and make lots of them. So for fun and profit. Now, in this case, I've made a bending jig so that I can take my 3/16 wire and wrap it around the various shapes and get a pattern that I like, which is supposed to represent the horseshoe. So let's start making the jig and I'll show you how we do it. When you're cutting your material on your saw, make sure you go really, really slow, especially with bigger stuff like this. If you go too fast, it usually just can't keep up with it and the blade starts to kind of take off at a little bit of an angle and you end up with a thicker part on one side, which happened in this case. So you can use any tool you want. You could basically just scribe a line on here and so that you can have it all the same thickness, and then just use a grinder, put this in your vise and grind it down. Clean it up with a file. That's one way you can definitely do it at home, but I'm all about using the tools you have to your disposal. So I have a little lathe here, so I am going to just do a little facing cut, clean this up real quick. It'll be way faster for me because I have a lathe. Get yourself a half round file, that way you can deburr all the edges on a round part and just take all the burrs off so we can weld it in. Alright, back to our scrap bin to look for a piece of plate steel that we can weld these parts to so we have a nice firm base to make our little bending jig for our puzzle. Go. Found a piece of 3/16 plate here. It's about the size I need. I don't need much. I just need something to hold these pieces in there on our jig so that we can have it not move on us. And this piece of 3/16 steel is going to work. Now the only thing is it's welded into something else that it's from originally. So we're going to have to grind and bust off some tacks, and I'm going to show you how to do that. Now, whether you screwed up or you're just trying to salvage some metal like I am, the trick to grinding this stuff off quickly and efficiently is you grind most of the tack weld or most of the weld off. You don't need to get 100% of it. In fact, often you don't want to grind right into the base material and ruin the piece. So grind about 90% of the weld. Try not to nick the surfaces of the other pieces. And then you get a big hammer and you just hit it really, really hard. So no. No. Yeah, big hammer, hit it hard and nice and clean and solid, and it should come off. And if not, then you haven't ground enough, go back to the grinder. Now in this particular situation, now that I've knocked off that plate, there is more welding underneath it, and it goes right to the corner edge here, which is going to be pretty awkward to try to grind out with a disc and hammer off. And considering I really don't even want this part here, it's probably not the best route. So in this scenario, I'm probably going to either get a zip disc and cut this off here, or even better, go use a cutting torch, use our new skills, hack that off, and there's my plate. All right, really nice straight cuts, not much slag, and I'm gonna make quick work of that with a grinder right here. And the little piece that I cut off because I didn't want the extra, guess what? I'm gonna use that too. I can weld that on underneath, kind of like a big T. That way I can clamp it into a vise. I really do like making jigs where you can just clamp it into vise and start your work. So let's do that. A little tip while you're waiting for your grinding wheel to stop spinning, rather than wasting your grinding wheel and damaging your table, just put it upside down like this on the table, let it spin till it comes to a stop. You're all good. All right, so now before I start just plopping things down here and welding this jig up, it would be a lot smarter of me to make a pen and paper template. That way I can make revisions and make it kind of look how I want it to be for the jig, rather than weld and grind them off and that kind of stuff. And the side benefit is I will have this template up for you guys, so if you want to be able to make this yourself, you can go ahead and just download it and print it and put it on your jig. So for me, I'm going to just basically put this down here and roughly trace out my kind of borders of where I can actually have for this. And then to keep things symmetrical, I think it would be a really good idea to have a center line here. So real quick, 110, 55, roughly 55. Have a nice straight center line to kind of go off for everything, so that way everything is symmetrical. Now, this has to be sitting here so that when I wrap the wire around here, I can get that horseshoe effect. So I don't want it off, and I don't want it, it doesn't have to be in the middle. Kind of need some room for it, so something like that. And honestly, for this kind of jig, we're just going to eyeball it like that. And I'll leave more detailed dimensions when I put this up for you guys, so you know exactly the sizes of the pipes and stuff. So roughly that's where that jig's going to be. And then I kind of hunted around the shop, something that's not too tiny, so that I can kind of have a horseshoe shape, but kind of not just end it and weld it. I think that would look really quite cheap. So I think if we do kind of like a little curlicue on the end and we'll wrap it around this, that would work good. Now I do want this symmetrical, but I do want it to kind of eyeball it and see what kind of shape first. So, you know, something like that. That might actually look okay, and you might end up doing a couple of versions of this to get the exact look you want. Obviously you don't want it too big or too skinny. And really, because I'm doing this jig the first time, I don't know if this will even work when I get this thing all welded up, but hopefully I don't have to make too many changes. So I think that something like that might work out okay. So I'm just going to quickly kind of jot down this so I can get kind of a center point from this circle. So if we have kind of a parallel line here, something like that. And that roughly is like 24 millimeters. So if we put this one over 24 as well. Now I could draw this circle out more just kind of for the look of it, but realistically all I need is the center point, and you'll see why in a sec. So 24, we'll just make this other one here exactly where I think it should be at 24 mil. And then roughly the center of this guy. And we'll call that 60 mil. Now, this is just what I'm measuring. I might tweak it still, and if you want some different look, then you go ahead and do that. So that's all the dimensions we need. Now, if you're kind of interested to see what kind of shape this would be, you just have to imagine that your thickness of wire is going to wrap around this. So I'm not going to go too thin, otherwise you'll be able to just mangle this puzzle. So we'll probably go, I don't know, something like that, maybe a little bit bigger, 3/16 wire. So kind of something like that. This would wrap around like that. And on this side, and then this one would wrap around. And we're going to try to get it as close as we can in there. And then we could do a little welding to make sure this doesn't come off. And that'll be symmetrical to the other side. Honestly, I think that looks not too bad. It doesn't have to exactly look like a horseshoe, but that's the rough shape. Now, the idea with this plate, once I've transferred these holes, I'm kind of thinking that where these points would be on this plate, we'll center punch them and we'll drill a hole so that this can go through. And we can always weld it from the underside so that the top side doesn't actually have a weld fillet that's going to block our jig in any way. And as for this part, when we weld it on, if we weld on the outside, it's going to interfere with our bending jig. So if we weld it on the inside, absolutely no problem. And I think when these are getting stuck out of the plate, we're going to go about the same height. That way we don't actually have any interference with the wire. We can kind of quickly just get past things to get it around, as opposed to having kind of a tall thing where you actually can't wrap it and get it around it. And then to connect the two together, I went scrounging through the shop and I found some nice sized chain. I think this will work nicely. It's about the same diameter that I kind of want to make the wire with. And I have seen versions of this with just one ring holding the horseshoes together. And I've also seen 5. I don't think it really matters too much. I think one might be a little tight if you have something designed wrong. So I'm thinking that we're going to stick with 3 of these. That way it basically one would attach there, the other one will attach to the second kind of horseshoe. And then the only thing after that is we've got to figure out a ring that can go around there, the ring that you're trying to get off of the puzzle. Now these little round bar chunks that we're going to weld in on the underside of the hole, technically you don't need to do anything. We can just weld it up in the bottom and then we'll be good. But I thought I would show you something else here. So if we take our angle grinder and we grind a decent sized chamfer on the bottom side where it's going to get welded, then when we weld that up, if in the future we wanted to grind and have that flush, you're not taking away any weld strength. So clean these up right now. So quickly laying these out and putting the pins in and kind of roughly putting where this pipe should be and grabbing a piece of the 3/16 wire, I'm basically just kind of trying to run it through my head here and figure out how I'm going to actually be able to get this to bend around and if there's going to be any issues. Now, first one right up is that when I start somewhere here and start wrapping it around this pin, I need something over here to support it, and I didn't put that in the plans yet because I don't know what it is. So it's basically just going to be a kind of small piece of flat bar spaced out so that I can fit this in there, and then that'll hold it so I can start wrapping it around here. Now I did originally cut these pins the same length, but it's really quickly obvious that when I start wrapping it around, I am going to have to lift it up to get over these pins, and so if they're really tall, that'll make it harder. So what I did is I took these ones here and I knocked them down a bit so that I can just barely clear the top of them, get by them. Yet there's enough sticking out that when I wrap around here, I just can get around and there's enough there to do the curving details and get this bent up. And then this one here is to make the ring after that will go on this puzzle. So I had to skimmy these down. I will put the dimensions on the plans for you so you guys know what this is. Let's weld the backside of these pins up. Those are welded in. Now the next thing we got to do is weld this ring down, but I want to have enough gap here, not so that it's so tight that I can't get it in, but not so sloppy that it kind of doesn't hold it right. So I kind of want it just a touch over 3/16, and then because I've got my line here, I'm going to try to center this as much as possible this way, and I probably should clamp this down so it doesn't kind of shift on me as I start, but really do a couple tacks, and then once it's down where you want, then kind of burn it in. And really, for what we're doing here, we don't need to actually weld the whole entire inside here. You're not really gaining anything except warping the jig up. So probably really just a couple tacks, maybe little stitch welds or something like that. Yeah, that looks nice and flat, so I'm just going to hit 2 more tacks, and honestly, that's probably going to be good enough. Make sure you lay in a bunch of heat though. One thing about MIG welding, you just do little delicate tacks on 1/4 inch 3/16 plate. You'll find that it did not get hot enough and it won't stick. There's that beautiful sound of bacon frying in a pan. Let you know you're doing it right. Alright, you can see our 4 tacks in here. That's plenty strong. Like I said, there's no need to weld a whole fillet in there. We're not trying to hold up a building. We just want to try to keep this little pipe from staying put. So, next thing is we're going to flip it over and we're going to weld on our little scrap piece of steel we cut off just so that we can put this into a vise. Now, when I'm welding this on the back side, you kind of just always got to be thinking ahead of what you're doing, because it really is quick to just make a mistake, weld something in the wrong spot, and you're back to grinding and hammering it off. So how do I want to work on this on my vise? Well, the vise jaw is grabbed this way, so if I just kind of naturally do this and weld it to the bottom, I'm going to end up having it like this, and that might not be the way I want to bend it. So maybe I do want to have it like this to start my bending. You know, it really just depends on what you're doing. I'm kind of thinking I'd like to see it like this way, so I have to weld in the plate this guy. Now, I could get a magnet, make this a lot easier for me. Anytime you can make your life easier, you really do want to do that. So I'll clean up one of these guys. That'll get it where I want it. And you don't have to be too picky, just kind of eyeball it for the center. That kind of looks okay right there. And even if this is not square, it's just getting it close. I'm going to do one tack on one side and then hammer with the, and use a square to make sure it's where I want it. That looks not too bad for me. So let's weld that. Okay, don't need the magnet, take it off. All right, doesn't really crazy have to be square, but what's the sense of making something if it's not square? Especially when it just takes a hammer. And this plate's not exactly flat, so I'm just going to kind of split the difference. Right in the middle square. And really that looks eyeball square, so we're going to stick with that. Do another tack. Yeah, that looks nice and square. So with these two tacks holding, if I do a quick tack here, it might start pulling. So what I can always do is very quickly just jump to the other side, hit one here, hit another tack there, and then that should be good enough. Sometimes if you can get that weld quick enough, it will start pulling on the other side as you start welding. So we've already got the tacks holding it too. There we go. Once again, realistically, do we need to weld this whole thing up? It's not required. It doesn't need it. It's just wasted material. All right, you can see nice big strong tacks. Evenly on both sides so it doesn't pull. Nice 90-degree. Yeehaw! And then there's our finished jig. Now let's go see what this looks like with some wire getting bent on it. Perfect, that grabs really nice. Next thing, let's see if this fits in here. Oh, for some reason that got a little too tight. Well, that's not that big of a deal. I mean, we're trying to make a precision jig by welding and basic machining. So, little needle file, we'll just open this up a little bit until this 3/16 rod fits in nicely. And there we go, that was nothing to do. Now, it's really easy to see that if I want to start bending here somewhere, I need something to stop this. Now, I wasn't exactly sure until I got to this step what I want to do. Now, once this wraps around, it will kind of go like this before it wraps around the big pipe. So I do kind of have a line here. So if I mark kind of where I don't want the end here to go past, otherwise it would interfere, then I kind of know where a stop point where I don't want to have this block here go further. And then I just have to have the same kind of gap, about a 3/16 of a gap, and I don't have to have the shape of it, so probably a little square piece that I can weld in somewhere right here. That way you basically stick it in there up to the kind of the limit and then just start bending. So let's figure out this and make that. All right, so off camera, I cut up a little piece here and cleaned it up for welding, and you can see if I use my pencil layout lines, we've got a nice kind of indicator for how far this should be inserted before you start. And then if we have a 3/16 gap between these two, then we can have that hold the round bar really nicely, so you start bending it. And one other thing that we're going to run into a problem here probably is as I bend it around here, I have to lift the round bar up to be able to clear these details. So it might actually kind of pull up out of here. So if I get another little block and weld it just to the top of here, just above that 3/16, that'll prevent this from lifting up when I try to do that. That way I can put it in there and start wrapping it around, get up over the details and bend it back. So one more little piece to cut and we'll get that together. And sometimes when you're making these jigs, the ideas just kind of pop up as you're doing them, and a better way of doing things. So rather than welding in a piece and welding another little teeny tiny piece, that kind of doesn't really make sense. Why don't we just put this block right against the pin? And before we do that, we get a drill bit that is roughly a 1/64 of an inch bigger. So in this case, it is 13/64. And we'll lay it all out, center punch it, and drill it right in the corner there. And then we will weld that in right here and here, and then you can just slip in the bar and that'll totally hold it in place. So I'm going to do that. All right, there's that little notch. Put that right in like that. If we weld it right up against, this can go in and out, and that'll be perfect. So let's go weld this in. So to place this little block, I've got my 3/16 wire kind of where it would be when I want to make my bend. That way I can place it kind of against it, so that is the definite stop where I don't want the end of this round bar to go past when we start this process. And then basically just push this up against the pin and kind of delicately hold it there while I give it a little tack weld. There we go, two nice big solid tacks. That ain't going anywhere. Now we got something to hold that and wrap it around and hold down the round bar when we gotta lift it up over these details. So cool, let's go try this. All right, so to figure out what length of 3/16 rod I need, you just grab yourself a piece of string and kind of just start pretending you're wrapping it up on your jig here, right? Just kind of walk it around like that. And around the last one and kind of connected. So there you got an idea there. And now you stretch that out and you measure it with a tape measure. And really, we should add some extra because you're not going to be able to bend that little bit with nothing hanging off the end. So I would maybe even add 4 inches or so, 5 inches or so, depending on how strong you are. And really, we need to make 2 of these, so double that and then add your 4 inches, and that's the length that you're going to cut. All right, so I've got my 3/16 wire cut here, and I've set up the camera roughly where I think it'll be safe so that I can actually move this wire around without smacking the tripod. So hopefully that'll be okay. So first thing, I can already see an issue that's going to pop up here, that when I go to bend this and go all the way around and finish, I'm not going to probably be able to get that out because this is going to trap it. Now, that could have been fixed by maybe drilling and tapping and putting a bolt in as kind of a stop that could be removed after. So if you're going to make one of these, you might want to try that. But I think I can kind of just bend it out and then just bend it back in place when we're done. So, all right, let's give this a try. So, flush with the end of the block here. Wrap it nice and tight. Now I do have to climb up over these other height things, but like I said, we can fix that after. Now I don't want to go too far past the big pipe. Try to scoot it down as much as I can though. Okay, wrap around the pipe. Just over the last one. And scoot it back around. Now, if I have the ability to kind of go full 360 on this guy, but this one doesn't have that. So what I might do is just kind of stop where it's about the same angle as the other one. Something like, oh, am I going to clear the tripod? No, I'm not. Okay, and just force the last little bit here so I can get it past the tripod for you guys. Something like that. All right, cool. So this end will come out. That'll come out, but like I said, it's trapped in here. So what I'm going to do is I'll pull it up this way, which will change it kind of this dimension on it, and then when we're done, we can just flatten that out. There we go. Cool. Let's flatten this out. And then really just flatten these out. And if the gap's a bit too big, you can always just kind of put it this way in the vise and close it up. And if you can't get a twist out, just kind of go a little bit excessively past so that when it springs back, it's nice in line. Very little gap there to weld up. And this guy we got to kind of try to flatten out, get it looking as close as we can to the other one. So we'll see about just flattening it first in the vise. All right, so very flat, a little bit of a twist still in it. Okay, flat, but we still got a gap here. So like I said, put it in the vise and just kind of close up the gap a bit, try to match it with the other side. Just kind of use your hands and kind of line everything up. Cool, there's one, and let's make another one. So we've got our two horseshoes made up on our new jig, and it was really quite quick and easy. So you can see how making 10 or 20 or 30 of these would be pretty quick. Now, because we designed this jig pretty quick and dirty with just paper and ruler and a pencil, and not really a lot of thought about metal elasticity or the whole entire process all at once, there's bound to be some mistakes. Now, first mistake is that off camera, I put in the 3/16 round bar in here and bent the ring that's supposed to be trapped in here for our puzzle, and it worked out great. Perfect ring, and cut it. It looks great, very little gap. However, I didn't think too much about how that is the same size as this. So really it's quite easy for someone to just pull it off and they've solved your puzzle. So a workaround on that is if we get a smaller pipe and weld it to a plate, make another little temporary jig, we can make a smaller ring, and it just doesn't fit on this jig. That's okay. So off camera, I've made it already, so I'm going to make a little jig now up with this guy, and then I'll show you how I bent up this ring. Now, in order for this ring to fit on this puzzle, we're gonna have to tweak this a little bit, and there's still some room in there, so we can kind of squish this up a little bit and get it to fit. So let's go do that. Now, the beauty of making these jigs is you don't throw them out, you just keep them. The next time you need one of these things, it's sitting there on a shelf, sitting there in a box, and you can make it just by throwing in a vise and making what you need. So, even though that other jig didn't work out for the ring, making this, it's not a big deal. We're going to use it again. So, cool. Let's cut this one up. Right, so now that we've got the ring made to go over top of this, you can see there's some issues. How are we going to get that over there? Well, remember there is some springiness to this, so why don't we just kind of very carefully kind of close this up a bit, and it's really quite malleable. You can kind of get it to what you need, and we'll make it just big enough for that ring to just get by. Something like that. Now, what's kind of cool is if you even leave it just a touch, people will think, oh, we're getting somewhere in the puzzle, but there's no way you're getting this off this big part here. So that'll work. Now for this horseshoe puzzle, you attach these with chains, kind of something like that. Now I've seen different versions of this where there's just one ring, 3 rings, 5 rings. There's quite a bit of difference and it doesn't really matter. So what I think I'll do is I'll try with 5 because I think it'll add a little bit more to the puzzle as opposed to just one loop. So we're going to count out 5 of these, and we don't have to weld this. We'll just cut the 6th ring, cut one part here, and then we'll kind of just split it to the side and then hop off the 5, and then we can kind of just open this and insert this chain in there and then close it back up, and then we can weld them so they can't come off. So let's cut this chain out. All right, to get these chains on, basically just hold this part of the vise, kind of flex it sideways, and that way you can kind of just put this end of the chain link in. Now, really important, you don't want to open the gap this way, otherwise it'll be really hard to close up that gap. Just go sideways either way, doesn't really matter. And really just stretch it enough that you can get the link on, and that's it. And then simply put it back in and close it. If you need to, you can kind of lean on it to get it to close nice. And don't worry about going a little bit past here where it's kind of crooked, not straight. You can always straighten that up after. All right, look at that. It's not coming out anywhere, and we're also going to weld that after we're done here too. There we go, cool. Now we just got to do the other side. Make sure there's no kind of twist in the chain. It should be hanging freely. There's no tension this way or that way. All right, very cool. Now, technically, this puzzle could be done just like this. It would be very hard for someone to try to yank this off, but if they were really strong, you might be able to flex this in that way to get this chain out. But since we're doing a welding video, why don't we put a spot of weld on there, and then this is not coming off. Now, when you go to weld up the gaps in your 3/16 round bar, keep in mind, you can weld with whatever you have, but there are going to be some machines where it will be a lot tougher just because of the scale and size of this. So a stick welder is probably going to be the worst, and a MIG welder probably could do it, but you're going to be doing quick little bursts, little tacks from different angles to try to close it up, and probably some grinding after. A really good choice for this would be a TIG welder, but we haven't taught about that yet. And we have done gas welding. So really, gas welding is probably the best way to do this, and maybe even brazing if you enjoyed that part and you kind of want something different looking on your puzzle. So let's get this welded up. Oh yeah, complete weld all the way around. This will be the way to go. Like I said, really quick little tacks, and you dump too much heat in there, you're just gonna melt through this. So that's perfect. Let's do the rest. All right, cool, good enough. Nobody's taking that ring off unless they know the puzzle. Now, I don't know about you, but even when you're starting to weld out, you kind of want to be proud of your welds. So really, here I didn't even grind the welds to kind of flatten it out or anything and smooth it. They look great. There's no holes. They look awesome. I want to show them off. I want people to see that. So all I did was knock off just a couple things of spatter that were on there, and then these are ready to clean up. Now, I wouldn't recommend cleaning these up completely with one of these 2-inch disc centers. Either very, very, very carefully use a wire wheel, or even just some elbow grease and some sandpaper. Pretty these things up, and then probably we'll put some paint on them. Look at that beauty. Well, I guess it's off to show you the secret of this puzzle. All right, now it's time for how to solve this puzzle. Now, the horseshoe puzzle is how do you get this ring off so it's all by itself, but it's trapped in here. So this is the solution. First thing you do is you grab it, and you grab this side, and you do a little clockwise twist, about 180 degrees. And then as you kind of put them down together, kind of like the U's are going together, take the left side right here and put it through the ring. And then scoot it down so that this ring can clear here and here. And it comes up, and you can see it's going to pop right out. So that is the solution. If you need to watch it again to learn it, it'll take a couple tries, but once you got it, you will remember it. Now, the very cool thing about this is it also is reversible. So once somebody's figured out that, or you can give them to this and say, put this on over top of these chains so it's kind of trapped in there, and they can figure it out that way. Now, the solution to put this ring on here is really quite simple. You take your horseshoes and you put them together. You put your ring on the right-hand side here and let it dangle. And as you spread these apart, you'll notice that the ring kind of goes up and to the center here, and you just kind of keep pulling, and it's already on. There's the twist that you kind of remembered from when you're taking off. You just undo it. There it is, trapped. So now you can go and stump your friends, make some money, pay for this, do bets for $2, $5, so you can do it. There's another video from Way of the Wrench and on how to become a welder, this time on how to make your very own welded metal horseshoe puzzle, and more importantly, how to make your very own jigs so you can do this stuff in the future. If you have any questions or concerns about what was going on in the video, put them down in the comment section below and I will get back to you as soon as possible. And if you haven't already, why don't you join us and follow me on Instagram, Way of the Wrench. Until next time, take it easy.